we will look at X bar theory, where we are looking at the structure of a phrase. We started with phrase structure rules and then we moved on to the structure with apparent and advantages that we have discussed so far. Okay. In order to answer these questions, we have looked at this sentence, and when we see this phrase structure, in this structure I have fixed your questions. Okay. Because now we can see things more clearly. So when we tell me again for everybody, this is making sense, right? There are just two simple points out of this these rules that I want you to understand. The algorithm is not so difficult, or these names are not so difficult for you to understand, like NP, VP and all those things. The two main points here are the following. A, these rules describe the sentence before, right? In order for us to understand the relationship among all the words in that sentence and how those words form a group and with whom, and then how each group of words, that is a phrase, is related to one another, right? That's one. Second is, these rules independently can generate infinite number of sentences with little bit modification or not, or even when we don't modify, these rules can generate lot of sentences. Of course, there are limitations of these rules, but these are the 2 points that we wanted through these rules. All right. Then this one shows us little bit clearly about these grouping of words, right? Okay. We have seen these things thus far, and we talked about why a subject is also called an inflectional phrase or a tense phrase or an agreement phrase, right? And we'll look at it more when we reach that part. Then we started looking at the structure of the phrase in terms of their binary branching. That is, the structure that we see now are all binary in terms of their branching. I don't have multiple branching structure on the screen, but I have shown you the multiple branching structure on the board, which will remind you that multiple branching structure was able to tell us grouping, but not much beyond that, in the sense that multiple branching have their own limitations, that they don't show any sort of hierarchical configuration. Okay. In order to capture conceptual hierarchy among phrases and units of a phrase, that is within the phrase, the reason why this was called X bar is because there was an intermediate node created for us to understand this whole thing. So we get 3 layers of representation of a particular phrase, that is head, then intermediate category, head will be N, intermediate category, that is intermediate level, N bar, and then the phrasal status of the whole phrase, that is NP or N 2 bars. All right. And this is the blueprint of structure of all the phrases. And then lot of other things come into play, which we are going to see, that how they become recursive and how they get connected with one another. So clear so far? the notion of this whole set of nodes tell us about the notion of specifier and complements as well with respect to head. That is, specifier, by virtue of being higher than the head, has a scope over both head and its complement, and complements are only going to be in close proximity with their heads. This is also categorically clear from these structures. Then we saw that sometimes we may not have a complement, or we may have a complement. We may not have a specifier, we may have an specifier. Irrespective of their physical presence, we are going to have, we have these spaces for them. However, we do not have a phrase if the head is not present. That is, without the head, we cannot conceptualize probably the phrase. So again, the head is not significant just for its name. The whole existence of the phrase depends on head. When we start looking at larger phrases, then we see how they are connected. So in this NP, we see the head of this phrase is a noun, and then a PP is its complement, and then again that PP is headed by a P with an NP complement. And then we can again break them into its actual shape, where the last NP that you see, physics, is not going to have its either have its specifier and complement. Therefore, I have just put them as NP. Clear? Okay. If we start looking at the verb phrase of the sentence that you have seen, that students of physics like pizza in the evening, the verb phrase part of this sentence look like this on the screen. Clear? Where in the verb phrase, the head of the verb is like, and then pizza is the complement of the verb. That is because verb is transitive in nature. And then we see that the PP in the evening is not really the complement. It has you can look at the configuration and see this is not the question of chicken and the egg. There are two things are prominently clear and visibly clear if you see this thing. The structure tells you that the noun pizza is in close proximity with the verb. That is the noun phrase which is being subcategorized, required by the verb as its complement. And in the evening is there are two things about the phrase in the evening. It's not related to pizza. If at all it has to say anything, it has to say something about the entire this part, entire this thing, that is like pizza. If this thing has to say anything, that is in the evening, is talking about like pizza. Okay? Therefore, it is higher, and since it's not a subcategorized or a required element, this kind of thing where you see the intermediate category being expanded, that is another of this is adjoint. This type of requirement or this type of manipulation is called, I don't mean manipulation in a negative sense, this kind of manipulation of the structure is called adjunction. where we have just another V bar adjoined, which serves the purpose, captures the way phrases are conceptually available in the structure, in the deep structure of the phrase, and also captures the distinction between a complement and the adjunct. Making sense? This much in very briefly in the last class we had seen in the last few minutes as well. We have looked at things so far, and I have again slowly gone over these things for us to understand how these things work.
So here the noun phrase the evening, can it be further split into specifier?
Yes.
So the would be the specifier.
The will be
no
this.
complement and evening.
Exactly.
And just about the preposition phase, shouldn't that also be split into a specifier first and the P dash?
Absolutely.
And then the
Yes.
even if it's blank, shouldn't we mention it?
You are right. You are right. It should be. But the reason why I haven't put them there, there are two reasons. A, there was not much of a space on the screen. That's one. B, I don't mean to underestimate your imaginations. Once you understand the structure of a phrase, but that could be the third reason. The first is there was no space here, and the second is it's a general practice in the when we look at the structure. See, we look at this structure right now. We are looking at this structure because I am taking you through these things one by one for the first time. But when people draw a structure of a tree in their understanding and investigation, the standard practice by people, I mean linguists investigating a sentence, the standard practice in the field is not to draw things that are not available, knowing very well that those things exist. So your question is absolutely right, and I agree with you that probably when these things are presented for the first time, they should be expanded. They will be nice, but that's how, like I have done with the VP. Okay, and also I took a little bit of liberty with this thing because I have done the VP here, right? Because we have a specifier, head and complement. We know nothing comes in the specifier of the PP. Therefore, in this PP, we have just dropped it. But we understand it. Do you understand the question and the answer both? Okay. So true. Now, let's go and look at the whole sentence. Okay. Bear with me for a moment. Again, for the purpose of the space, I have reduced the subject, and I'm going to show you the subject separately. Just look at how it is, how the whole sentence projects itself, and what is combined with what. You have seen all the way to VP, right? Now look at the whole sentence. We are calling the whole sentence an IP, right? You can call it anything. Even if we call S, doesn't matter much. The practices are, even when you put S in the top, in the branching people go with I bar and I. The idea is not to put S bar and S. Okay, because S represents the sentence and not a phrase. So when we call IP, what we are saying is we are considering the whole sentence as a phrase. And just like in a smaller phrase like NP or a VP, the head of the phrase is a noun or a verb. When we say the entire sentence is IP, the head of the sentence is an I, which means inflection. Okay? And in the place of inflection, here you see What do you see in the place of inflection? In this sentence? Which PRES, which means present tense. Okay? So, I have put only tense here. I have put only tense here. So, there could be several questions. Then why don't you call it T or TP? Right? Again, we can call that, but the point will be the same. Okay? We can call it TP and then T bar and T and then everything else. Doesn't change anything. We can call it AgrP, AGR bar, then in the place of I we say AGR, right? And then put something there. I want you to understand conceptually a very simple thing, that whatever the name we give is not really important. What is important is sentence is a phrase by itself. And this notion of representing or drawing a sentence captures the fact that in the head place of a sentence, whatever comes is the most important part of the sentence. Saying the same thing in other words, the advantage of this structure is it clearly shows you what is the head of a sentence. What is the most important part of a sentence? Do you see the thing putting both ways? The advantage of this structure is it captures the important part of the sentence and it enables us to see the most significant part in a sentence. Right? Sentence itself is tenseless. Not all the time.
But in this, the example you gave.
Oh, right. Very true. What I have told you when we discussed about tense, when we said things like, when we say like pizza, remember what I said is there is no tense marker present. That doesn't mean tense is absent. Tense marker is not visible in a sentence like this, and tense marker is visible in a sentence like okay, so this becomes a tense marker. At that time what we were discussing is very simple thing. The tense is a slippery category. Okay, in the language like English, the whole notion of gender is completely zero all the time. Unlike our languages where we see gender appearing at the surface structure. Are you with me? Are you following me? In our languages, we see gender appearing at the surface structure, on surface. Can you give me an example of this thing? When I say in our language, we see gender appearing on the surface.
So appearing on the surface, you mean there is a marker?
Marker clearly visible. Exactly. And the reason why I am taking you again slowly, because I want to clarify this point in a very clear way. Anybody?
मैं पढ़ रहा हूँ.
So पढ़ रहा हूँ, what kind of tense is visible on the verb? Some sort of masculine marker, right? Which tells you that the subject of the sentence is masculine, right? In a language like English, it's always going to be dormant. It's never going to be visible. I am reading, he is reading, she is reading. It's always going to be dormant. Now, the point is, it's not that there is no tense in English. It's just dormant for the purpose of grammar. It does not participate in grammatical process. Okay, therefore never surfaces. In a language like Hindi, because it participates in grammatical process, it surfaces sometimes. Okay. Similarly, in a language like English, tense is a very slippery category. Sometimes it has no manifestation, and sometimes it has manifestations, right? Even here, okay, so and this is the story only in present tense. The reason why I am calling, do you understand why I am calling it a slippery category? Are you following it or not? No. So you need to ask, what do you mean by slippery? Okay, only then I will know that it's not clear to you. I can figure out some things by looking at your faces, but not everything. Okay. Slippery means it's hard to put your finger on it, right? It's hard to catch, in the sense that, see, any marker of tense here? No. Any marker of tense here? Yes. So if this story is about, but we know that there is a present tense here. This sentence is present tense, right? When I say I like pizza, the sentence is present tense, right? So there is no marker of present tense, but this is there is no marker of present tense, but this is present. So 0 marker. This is clearly a present tense marker. So in the story of present tense, sometimes it appears, sometimes it doesn't. In the past tense, it's always going to appear. In the future tense, it's always going to appear. So when it appears sometimes and when it doesn't appear sometimes, that is called hard to put your finger on. Sometimes it's 0, sometimes it surfaces. Okay. Nonetheless, it's never conceptually absent. Okay. This is an important thing for you to understand. This distinction is very crucial. When we say no tense marker, we don't mean to say no tense. We are only saying no physical marker of tense. Okay. And this kind of a structure also helps us see that tense is available. It also helps us, there are several other things which I am going to show you little later. Once we have developed the whole structure of a sentence, then we will move on to see what else this kind of a structure helps us understand. Because if it only helps us understand nice looking picture, that's not enough. That's too heavy a load on human mind. Are you still with me? Okay. Any other question so far?
Sir, we said imperative sentences.
Right.
We said they have no tense, so we
Right.
are saying that it has no tense marker, or they are truly no
No.
tense. They are
In that
tenseless.
case, there is no tense also. Here we are saying no tense marker. When we say tenseless sentences, we literally mean no tense. And in that kind of a structure, just tell me how will the structure work? In that structure, what do you see here in place of I? Present tense. In that case, you will see zero.
So this particular sentence, John, first of all, it should be likes pizza in the evening.
Very nice. Go ahead.
So this is showing a habit or something which is
Sure.
continuing. So does this still have tense? I mean, I thought that when you say something like I live in Chennai, or you say he lives in Chennai, is it present tense or is it imperative sentence?
How many of you understand his question? Do you understand? Many people? You understand? Very, very, very nice question and very significant question. And these are the things which I sincerely request you to understand with clarity. There is absolutely no rush. We can spend time on these things. And trust me, Once you understand these distinctions and the underlying facts of this kind of question, these things are going to make more sense to you. Okay, understand this? So give me a couple of minutes to clarify this, clarify his question. You're right. What's the first thing that you were saying, that this should be John likes pizza? Okay, very nice. When we say, how about I like pizza, then it would have been okay, right? What this is trying to show you is this S on the verb is something else. That's, by something else we mean something external. It tells us about something. So this verb likes, and please stop me if it stops making sense to you. As long as it is making sense, listen to me, and if it stops making sense, please stop me. We are saying there are two things here. One is the verb and then something else. So this, when we are representing the structure in threadbare part, verb is only responsible for verb, it's not responsible for anything else. Therefore it's not carrying any S. And I wanted, this is not a typo or anything, and I wanted you to see that clearly, that verb is only responsible for verb. Whatever this information is, has to be represented or manifested somewhere else in the structure. On the surface level, when we speak the sentence, this information shows up on the verb. True. But in the conceptual representation, this information has to go somewhere else, because this information belongs to somewhere else. Okay? The verb as a category can only contain verb. So that disjoint is what you see here. Okay? Now, what is this information? What kind of information does this give us? Tell me, what kind of information does this give us? Singular, right? Everybody? Because if it is plural, then you don't see this coming. Okay? Now, the story of I is little bit different. I don't want to mix everything. Okay? The story of I is different. We say I like pizza and he likes pizza, right? He is singular, therefore likes, but how about I like? Is I plural? Now this story is something else. This is a different story of English, which has something English specific for us to understand. And if you remember, I'll tell you that story later, because let's understand this thing right now. What you said is right. This is a singular marker. Okay? If we put here a plural pronoun like they, we get like. If we put a singular one, he, then we get likes. So this is a singular marker. Now, singular marker is part of agreement. It's not the marker of tense. See this thing? Singular marker is part of agreement, not part of tense. Tense is present, meaning it's present tense, but physically it is absent. See this thing? There is no physical marker of present tense on this sentence. So this is an agreement marker, the tense marker is 0, and you said something else which is very interesting.
Why is this not an imperative sentence?
What? No.
I thought that there is no tense in the whole sentence.
That was not true to begin with. Imperative sentences are tenseless sentences. So when we say there is no tense, there are only two types of sentences which takes no tense. In fact, the whole story is one. See, modal verbs do not take tense. There are two types of this. One is subjunctive, right? In English, the same thing is called optative. You may have heard sentences like, may you live long, right? May you live long. Those are the sentences of optative types. They are tenseless. When someone says, may you live long, what's the tense here? And to understand whether tense is present or not, we need to know what is it that tense tells us. Tense only talks about time. If a sentence does not show any relation with time, that is in the present, past or future, then we say such sentences are tenseless. Okay? Yes, if a sentence shows timing, then that sentence is in terms of present, past and future, then that's a sentence with tense. No big mystery here. So this sentence, I like pizza, is this present? Forget about the markers right now. Is it talking about present time, past time or future time? It talks about time. It doesn't talk about future. Why it seems like no time is something else that I am going to show you. It's not future, it's not past, it is present. Now, hold on. So this is one which will be tenseless, may you live long. The other is imperatives. Things like go home. Okay? These are the kinds of sentences in natural languages which are called tenseless sentences. Others are going to be sentences with tense. So this has present tense. The other thing is called aspect. I think we have discussed that with respect to when we were discussing about tense and other agreement and functional categories. There were several things that we discussed. Does anyone remember what are the things that we discussed here with aspect? Okay, continuous was one. What did continuous say? Now continuous is, so aspect is different from tense because we can take any tense and any aspect and make a sentence, right? So I can take a present tense and continuous aspect. I can say I am eating pizza, right? Is this continuous, eating, and present continuous? I can take a past tense and still make a continuous sentence. What would be the sentence?
I have been.
No, not have been is something else. Past and continuous. I was eating pizza. Okay, past tense and continuous. Why is it continuous and still past? Because it's talking about something which was in progress at some moment of time in the past. That some moment of time is shared between speaker and the listener. Okay, but it's talking about continuation of something in some moment of time in the past. Therefore, I am eating pizza is present and I was eating pizza is past. So one is that this distinction is about present and past, which is timing, tense. Aspect is different from tense. So aspect talks about the way things were happening, which is that was continuous. ing represents continuous. And what is this? What's the aspect here in this sentence? The aspect here is habitual, or the same thing is called indefinite. Okay, the same thing is called indefinite because there is some sort of regularity in it, there is some sort of indefiniteness in it, so we call it habitual also. So I just want you to understand the terms. We use different terms with the same meaning. So the reason why this sentence gives you the feeling that it's definitely not future, It's definitely not past. And it gives you a sense of not present is because of its indefinite nature.
So then
How do we differentiate between?
habitual and the imperative?
Habitual and imperative.
Yeah.
That is because when you say I like pizza, you are talking about something which is indefinite in the sense of a particular habit formation. Okay? When you are talking about imperative sentences like go home, it's not habitual. It's one time instruction. Go home. There is a categorical difference between the two. When someone says go to Chennai next week, if I tell you go to Mumbai next week, and if someone says I live in Mumbai, don't you see a difference between the two types of sentences? One is talking about indefinite nature of a stay in the city of Mumbai. When someone says I live in Mumbai, it means you don't know when I started living, you don't know when I am going to move to next city. At this moment in time, it's a continuous, there is some sort of regularity in my stay in Mumbai. It's not, when I say I am living in Mumbai, I don't mean I am a visitor in Mumbai. See the point? That's called indefinite status coming from the verb, which comes through aspect, okay, which is indefinite. So for this sentence, I like pizza or he likes pizza, the things are, this is present tense, indefinite aspect, okay, singular agreement marker, all these kinds of information is associated with verb, okay. All such things are associated with verb, but they have to be manifested somewhere else. In this structure, they have to be manifested somewhere else. Get my point? Now, can we move beyond the verb phrase? So, let me get a consensus here first. Are we clear about sentences with tense? Not just this example. Take the examples of other sentences that I have given you. I am eating a pizza, and I was eating pizza. With the help of all such sentences, do you understand the distinction between a sentence with tense and sentence without tense? That's number one, where I want your clarity. Number two, when we have sentences with tense, tense alone is not enough. What other information we get from the verb besides its timing is also things like continuous, habitual, or perfected. Somebody said, I have been eating pizza. Is this present tense or past tense? Present tense. And what aspect? It's way too complicated. It is present, you are right, tense is present. Perfect is also something that we see because it gives us a sense that something is about in the recent past, and then it gives continuity also. I have been eating. Okay, it's present, perfect, continuous. I don't want to complicate it to that far, but again, like I have told you, I have promised you in the beginning, I will only point out things later when we are looking at more complicated stuff. It's not that I have been eating pizza is the sentence that you have heard for the first time. You may have written this sentence several times, you may have spoken these kinds of sentences several times, and you know this sentence. What if I ask you to describe this sentence in terms of its tense and aspect, and when you come up with the term present, perfect, and continuous, you will be lost with how can something be continuous and perfect both at the same time. So we are only talking about 4 or 5. Some languages like Sanskrit have 12 different aspects. In some languages, certain aspects are not present. In some languages, lot many aspects are captured. Again, number of aspects in a sentence, visible and not so visible, is language dependent thing. Is language a specific thing which is part of parameter. The fact that we know these distinctions categorically clear here, there is a reason why someone will say I am eating, right? I have eaten and I have been eating. There is a difference between all these sentences, and those differences are not just subtle. Those differences are categorical. You just listen to this, is a very simple sentence. I am eating, I have eaten, and I have been eating. Aren't the distinction categorical? This is not subtle difference. I am eating is present continuous. I have eaten is present perfect. I have been eating. You gave this sentence. I didn't want to give you these things. Therefore, I am only trying to stay with the simpler sentences, because the important part is for us to understand the concepts, not the sentences. Like I have been telling you, we are not dealing with English. We are dealing with these aspects. So, coming back to that, do you see the difference between these three sentences? I am eating, I am repeating this again. I am eating, I have eaten, and I have been eating. I have eaten is an example of present perfect, which is very different from I had eaten. If you say I had eaten and I have, what's the difference between I had eaten and I have eaten? Completed just now. Which means present perfect and past perfect both gives us a sense of perfection. By perfection we mean completion of an action. But the two gives us the reading is recent past, that is just now, and remote past. Again, human mind makes no mistake in figuring out or applying the notion of relativity in terms of time. Recent past and remote past are relative terms. As you can understand, in a human history, 50 years may be recent time, right? But when we are talking about eating pizza, 2 hours ago may be recent time, 4 hours ago may be remote past. 4 hours ago may be remote past with reference to 2 hours as recent past, right? The point is, human mind makes no mistake with these things. It does its calculation perfectly nicely without us knowing about these things, which again goes back to the point of knowledge of language that I have discussed with you. Get the point? Second, so tense alone is not enough for these things. So that is aspect. Then there is a notion of agreement. Okay, that is singular thing has to be agreed with singular and plural thing has to be agreed with plural. These are the categories in language. If you have to give a metaphor, when we make a nice chicken or vegetables, when you are served that thing in a plate, what you see is a nice chicken dish. What you don't see is the specific ingredients it might contain. Okay, functional elements are like them, that we don't see them with bare eyes. Okay, for us to see that, we need to know what such things are, right? Similarly, so these elements are functional elements in language. These are functional elements involved in making a sentence. All right. I wanted to make one more point and then go to the structure, which is and functional aspects of language have to be different from lexical aspects. Lexical markers, that is lexical elements like, pizza, I are only visible things, and they are going to carry functional elements. Sometimes, and here is the point that I want you to understand very carefully. Sometimes functional things like agreement marker, tense marker, aspect markers are going to be visible when they appear in their real faces, real forms. They are going to be visible. Sometimes they are not visible. That does not mean they are not there. Even in the tenseless sentence, when we say there is no tense, we only mean that tense is 0. Okay? No tense is not really tense, but it leaves the possibility that there are sentences that are going to have tenses. Okay? Now, having said that, can I ask you final time that tense aspect makes sense to you now? Tense and aspect? Let's come here now. What you see beyond VP that we have added in this slide, which is IP. IP, and like I have been telling you, sentence is called inflectional phrase. It's called inflectional phrase not because it's a nice term. All the functional elements that you have seen, tense, aspect, agreement, they are all inflections. Okay? Tense, aspect, agreement that you have seen here, they are all part of inflection.
So are they inflecting the verb?
They are going to be,
Inflect the verb, that's why they are called.
that's right, they inflect the verb.
Yeah,
True.
morph the verb. So
Absolutely right. They are in simpler terms we say they show up on the verb.
yeah.
But technically you can definitely say they inflect the verb. True. We see them only when verbs are inflected. When verbs are not inflected, we call that infinitive. To go, to like. When verbs are inflected, then they don't remain infinitive. You understand this now? They are not infinitive verbs. So verbs get inflected, and then we see all of them are part of inflectional category. They are all inflectional category. Therefore, they are going to stay with inflection. And there has always been a discussion that which one is more important, tense, aspect, or agreement. Okay? With reasons, people have argued for tense, with reasons people have argued for agreement, and with reasons people have argued for inflection. Inflection being more important because inflection contains both tense, aspect, agreement, everything together. Okay? Therefore, we call it inflectional phrase. And in this inflectional phrase, I have put this is where we were stuck, and we want to come back to this thing again. I have put only present. So it seems like inflection only means tense, right? But one can always put in the place of inflection I, the whole bunch of features, tense, aspect, and agreement. All of them are part of inflection. And this was the reason, let me close this thing by saying that this was the reason why people said no. We need to separate the things out, otherwise it's going to be, it's not making much sense. So tense is more important, aspect is more important, or agreement is more important. Okay? Now, the more important discussion is not what is important and what is not important. The important point was they should manifest clearly. They should be represented clearly. I'll show you one more structure which is going to be very nice, and I invite you to see this thing in the book. It starts with inflection, okay? And if you can understand, and if you are still with me with a structure, listen to me. It starts with inflection, right? And then it goes to I, and then it goes to TP, then it again goes to aspect phrase, and then it goes to agreement phrase. Manifesting everything. And then comes VP. See the point? So there are two ways of doing it. Either you project everything else, or you just project I and then VP. In both the cases, I know we need to stop. In both the cases, where do you see VP coming in? VP is what in the sentence? Complement of I. Okay? VP is the complement of I. And this should show you what we have been discussing in terms of subject and predicate. Okay? And we'll continue our discussion more. Where do you see subject? Subject, you don't see it so far, and I have tried to put it there. Subject is actually the specifier of the sentence. Remember when we discussed subject and predicate, we said subject is outside the predicate. It becomes, and it's higher up, it becomes the specifier of the sentence. Okay? We'll continue from this slide tomorrow, and we'll discuss more where I'll show you this thing, that how a bigger subject is represented. Okay?